My name is Kevin Nielsen. I manage the power generation organization for SRP. So what that means is all the power plants and dams that generate electricity fall into my organization. Years and years ago, what it looked like was everybody had their list of their favorite projects. You would bring those to an annual planning meeting of some sort. Maybe there would be some criteria against which we would compare them. So maybe it's affordability and reliability, and everybody would pick their favorites, and there would be some lobbying, and most of the investments, people would argue for them. If they couldn't resolve the argument, then it would end up being something like, okay, that's non-discretionary then. So almost 85% of our investments ended up being termed non-discretionary. So there was no decision to make. We just said we have to do that. So that defeats the purpose of trying to optimize what are you actually doing with the money that SRP's entrusted us with. In the end, we'd come up with some sort of prioritized list. It would go in a nice big 3-ring binder. You'd sit on your shelf and probably never look at again. There were many people who felt like, okay, we need to do something different. We looked at a number of different options for tools, software, something that would help us go through the process a little bit more efficiently and a little more effectively. And took forward a business case that said, if we just eliminate low value investments from our portfolio, we 10, 20 times pay for the software. And it was immediately accepted by the company, and we were off and going. So our implementation started with a segment of the company. So we had transmission, and the generation folks were the first groups to really get involved and start using Copperleaf. We started bringing in other groups across the company. So the facilities folks, the water services folks, the transportation, IT, all these different groups, we would build out the value framework so that the value that they felt came from their investments is recognized. So little by little, it's spread across the entire company. And now every investment that we make in capital in SRP goes through the value framework, goes through the Copperleaf tool. The tool that Copperleaf has really helped us understand the term value a little bit better than what we had at SRP. For a long time, value was cost benefit. How much did it cost versus how much benefit is it going to bring you? And if it's positive, yes. If it's negative, no. We started to see with the Copperleaf tool that value is much more than just dollars. For example, what's the value in public perception improvement from a particular investment? What's the value in safety improvement? That's sometimes hard to quantify, and people get into heated arguments about how do you quantify safety. But it is a value that we're interested in. What's the value to environmental compliance? What's the value to our communities around us? We started to look at all the different dimensions of what value comes from an investment. And then with Copperleaf's help, we figured out ways to effectively measure those and balance them against the traditional cost metrics and reliability metrics, so that you end up with a pretty even evaluation platform that anybody can use for any investment. And then the different investments come into that process, and there's really no more argument about how do I compare to somebody else, because the framework provides that mechanism. If somebody comes forward and says, my investment's not being evaluated fairly, then we say, okay, let's look at the value framework and see what we need to adjust. If there's some new value that you're bringing that we hadn't thought of, we're willing to add that, because we want to recognize any type of value anywhere from any investment. We're now having conversations about investments that, like I said before, were considered non-discretionary or sacred investments that nobody dared talk about. Today we're talking about them, and we're having an objective conversation. We're comparing investments across all the different types of assets instead of just transmission or just generation. We're working together as a team. We're looking at a holistic picture of our portfolio of capital instead of individual groups coming up with their own priorities. So those are all huge benefits that have come through implementation of this process. SRP is not going to move away from the process. to the top of the company, there is incredible support and feeling that the implementation of our capital governance and Copperleaf is extremely effective, is the direction that we need to go, and is what's going to help SRP in the future. We're in an industry right now and in an area of the United States where our growth is probably the highest in the entire country. Prioritizing our capital is going to be incredibly important for the next foreseeable future. So we see Copperleaf as a valuable tool to help us keep up with the growth and keep doing the things we're doing.